allow me to share my greeting. Good morning to our friends in North and South America. Good afternoon to our friends in the UK and Europe. Good evening to our friends in the Middle East, in India, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Australia. Good to see you. Hope you're keeping well. I believe we have some juicy questions, JC.
Question 1, dear Ajahn. I feel deeply saddened about the situation in Gaza and compelled to do something to respond to it, to raise my voice and call for peace. And I do something within my means and reach, which is not much, but I do it anyway. I'm seeing some Buddhist teachers and communities also raising their voices, sending letters to leaders and opening up petitions for peace. But many Buddhist teachers and communities are silent on the matter. I'm surprised and confused about this silence. I'm not sure I understand what it means. If it is not too much to ask, could you please share your views on this? And in your opinion, what is a skillful way to respond not only to this but any humanitarian matter going on in the world? Thank you.
So if you are brave enough to ask a difficult question, you have to be brave enough to listen to a difficult answer. And this person has asked a difficult question. Now I'm going to give a difficult answer. So firstly, that this person has compassion and that they feel compelled to do what is within their means to respond, I think that's skillful. I think that's beautiful. That's a practice of engaging compassion and metta. So very good. The issues underneath a lot of humanitarian crises, this is like, welcome to the world of realpolitik, which is a very depressing world. I think there was the United Nations did gather, and 90% of nations expressed their support for a ceasefire. So 90% of nations, that means the representatives of 90% of nations, what's that, about 170 countries around the world, all said unanimously that they wanted a ceasefire. So it's not that people aren't objecting. The head of the European Parliament also said, many people have said, from what I've seen in the news, that the Israelis must abide by believe it or not, the laws of war. There are certain parameters within, once a war has been declared, that countries are supposed to behave. So as far as I can see, there has been a lot of objection, and then the question has to be asked: why, when most people in the world don't support this, most people in the world are objecting to it, why does it still go on? And this is where we have our difficult answer. And so sadly, the biggest industry in the world, in the whole world, is weapons manufacture. So money is an extremely powerful thing when you're talking about the biggest industry in the entire world. Unfortunately, a lot of people make money out of wars. A lot of very powerful people. And so I think it's a very good example to see that our governments actually are not really in control. And they don't really represent the will of the people. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if you take, hardly everyone talks about Ukraine anymore. But if you take, for example, Ukraine, how many Americans actually wanted $100 billion sent in military aid to Ukraine? I suspect most of them didn't support that. given the crises that they face in their own inner cities and in their healthcare and all sorts of problems that they have there. Most Americans probably would have preferred for US resources to be spent in the US. And yet, the Congress got together and more than $100 billion was sent in military aid. Why? Because huge chunks of that go to the Raytheon and BlackRock and General Electric and all of these places that manufacture weapons. So unfortunately, in the world of real politics, money talks. And I have a terrible feeling that these things are not, oftentimes these things are orchestrated. Some of you, I was watching some news and I saw that somebody pointed out that on the Economist magazine news cover in 2012, there is a picture of the leader of Hamas flying a hang glider and Benjamin Netanyahu also flying a hang glider. That was 11 years ago. And apparently these terrorists from Gaza flew over the Israeli walls in hang gliders. There's a lot of suspicious things have gone on with the attack on the Israelis on that day, because the Israelis have this like incredible security state. They've got, incredible security. So some people use the word false flag. Sometimes elements of governments are involved in doing things to push forth a certain agenda. And so it actually looks like certain elements of the Israeli forces did not do their job, that there was allowed to be a massacre, so that there would be the self-righteous anger to justify this invasion. And I think one thing that we need to do as Buddhist practitioners is we need to step back and we need to understand where we are in the eon. It's because what we have is we have our personal preferences, we have our sense of what is right and wrong, but we are one of a community of somewhere between 7 and 8 billion human beings. And what is occurring is like we have our individual karma, but there is also a group karma. And we, sometimes for myself, like for example, remember during the lockdowns when the government announced that you would have 2 weeks to slow the curve. 2 weeks was 3 years in China. 2 weeks was 2 years in Melbourne. And when the government decided that it wasn't going to be 2 weeks, it was actually going to be 2 years. Did anybody get to vote on it? No. So it's very interesting. Oxfam in England produces some very interesting statistics about where the wealth is going. Most people won't be aware of this, but the lockdowns were the biggest wealth transfer in history. Basically, the middle class was shrunk a lot. An extra 125 million people fell into abject poverty around the world. And I think it was like 70% of African American businesses went bankrupt, only 40% of them reopened. But then you have the Walmarts were allowed to stay open, the Costco's were allowed to stay open, Amazon was allowed to deliver. And what happened? All of the small businesses went bankrupt, many of them. And who got to vote on that? Who got to vote that we all should stay home and the big businesses can make more money and all the small businesses have to go bankrupt? Well, nobody got to vote on that. But it does suggest that the people with the most money are able to influence government policy. And then we have these kind of horrible situations. But the point is, we are in the part of the eon where it's the darkening part of the eon. So the human world, it's like waves. It has periods of time where it's kind of in the middle between heaven and hell. Then it has periods of time where it's closer to hell. Then it has a period of time it comes up to the middle again, and then it goes up, it's closer to heaven. So there's these waves of group karma, waves of shared karma, waves of shared experience. So when you are in the darkening part of the eon, Lord Buddha explains, where the human lifespan is 100 years or less, most people don't keep the 5 precepts. And because most people don't keep the 5 precepts, we don't have truly virtuous leaders. So the idealism we have, the hopes we have, the dreams we have, the personal commitment to ethics that we have is not shared by most people, unfortunately. And there's different ways to look at this. Like if you study psychology, apparently 1% of the human population is a psychopath, 2% are sociopaths, 3% are malignant narcissists. That's 5%, right? So 5% of the human population are incapable of empathy. That's 1 in 20 people. Then you have the autistic people. Now, unfortunately, who also are not great at feeling empathy. And there's a lot of them too. Unfortunately, psychopaths and sociopaths are notorious for having heightened intelligence and charm, and they're manipulative. So, because a psychopath that doesn't experience empathy or doesn't feel compassion, what makes them feel safe is having all of the power. And what gives them pleasure, unfortunately, is sadistic pleasure. Because these people, because of their karma, whatever reasons they set up in the past, they don't feel human connection. They don't feel empathy. They don't even have remorse when they do something wrong. They just feel bad if they get caught. And so ordinary people have what's called normalcy bias. You think that everybody should think like you. And we all need to wake up in a way. 1 in 20 people at least are not capable of thinking like you. They don't have empathy. They don't have compassion. They don't have remorse. They don't care. And then you get CEOs of arms manufacturers, and then you get the people who are willing to work manufacturing arms. You get the people researching manufacturing weapons of mass destruction. You get all of these people are willing to do evil things because it pays well. And there are millions of them in our world. And it's probably not the people you associate with. You're a nice person, you like nice people. You probably don't go to a dinner party with the CEO of Raytheon. But a lot of people do. A lot of people who want to be rich and to join the exclusive country clubs and to be able to afford the private jet and have the underground bunker, as long as they're okay. Unfortunately, there are millions of people who are like that. So that's the world we live in now. And so it's interesting, in the time of the Buddha, his own kingdom was invaded. I think this is really important to consider. Lord Buddha, who has incredibly vast stores of merit, unimaginable, imponderable, just fill the universe with merit. He goes forth, he becomes the fully perfected Buddha, and an invading army comes to attack the kingdom where he was born. So what did he do? He stood in the way of the road and he put up both hands. Don't do this. The army went away. They came back a second time. The Buddha did the same thing. When they came back a third time, the Buddha contemplated the matter, and the Buddha realized, this is their karma. I can't stop this. Now, this is hugely instructive. If you have faith in Lord Buddha, who gave us the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, all of the wonderful meditations, this is also a teaching from Lord Buddha. He, with his perfected merits, who established a community that will last for 5,000 years and produce millions of arahants, could not stop an invading army from invading his own kingdom. And what's very interesting is the rules that he laid down for the monks. We are allowed to visit palaces. We're allowed to give teachings to kings and queens and princesses and consorts, but we are not allowed to step foot on an army base. It's very interesting. We're not allowed to align ourselves to any side in a war. So if people want to wonder why the monks are silent, the monks, at least if we're taking the archetype or the standards of the Buddha in the early Theravada tradition, the monks are renunciants. They are to be aloof from worldly matters. Because there's no end to disasters, there's no end to war, there's no end to famine. And as soon as you take a side, the people on the other side hate you. So the way you get a tradition to last for thousands of years, Theravadan monasticism is one of the longest lasting groups of societies or human civilization that's still going, passed through who knows how many changes of dynasty in China, how many wars in Europe and India, everywhere else. And we're still here. Why? Because we don't take sides. We don't stick our head up and make ourselves the enemy of anybody, so that we can give people teachings about how to liberate yourself from samsara, because it is unsatisfactory. That's our job. And so this is a lesson in unsatisfactoriness. You see how bad it gets? The Buddha didn't say you should try to make samsara perfect. He said you'll never be able to. The Buddha, if you're a Buddhist, if you're a disciple of the Buddha and you respect Lord Buddha, you understand that he says, keep your ethical precepts, produce merit, be good and kind on your path to liberation. Get out of here, is what he's saying. So people who take their vows to be aloof seriously won't say much. And our job is to remind you, yes, it's unsatisfactory. Do you remember hearing anything about unsatisfactoriness? Oh, that's the First Noble Truth. It's very unsatisfactory. So what's happened for many of us is we've lived in a period of relative peace, and we've grown up in a period where there's been conversations that humans have rights, inalienable rights. And there's even laws about how you go about war. But those things are concepts, those things are ideals. And what is deeper than that is individuals' karmas and groups' karmas. And unfortunately, if most people don't keep the 5 precepts, most people are not generating the causes to have benevolent, trustworthy, honest leaders. So this is the time of the eon we've been born in. This is the human family we're part of. Most human beings, Ajahn Anatta says it quite bluntly. He says most human beings are not human. They have a human body, but they're functioning on a subhuman level. Only 1 in 4 are truly good. So that's, I think it's really important to contemplate this, because we, in a way, many of us have too high expectations of what we can expect from the human world at this time. When most people don't keep the precepts, you have to expect famine, wars, conflict, hardship. That's the way it is at this point in the eon. Now, the good news is that after it goes on for what's it called? Seemingly interminable period of darkness. After that, it gets better. And then it gets much better. And then Maitreya Buddha comes. And it's very interesting. In the time of Maitreya Buddha, apparently 84,000 princes and 84,000 princesses go forth on the same day, listen to one sermon, and become arahants. It's very interesting. Why is that possible? How is that possible? In the time of the Buddha, it took some time before bhikkhunis came about, had that opportunity. Because all of the people born in the world at that time are extremely virtuous, cultivated a lot of metta. It's a time of incredible equality. There's no disease, there's no war, there's no famine. The only disease is aging and death. But there's no colds, there's no flus. Apparently the food grows by itself. The rain only rains gently. and there's no storms even. I asked Ajahn, is this possible? He said, yes, because everybody has jhana samadhi. Everybody in the world has been practicing dana, sila, and bhavana for so long. When they get born at that time, they all have jhana from childhood. So they're experiencing these profoundly pure and peaceful mind states. And then when they hear a teaching, they become, oh, boom, I'm enlightened now. They're so ready, they're so ripe, they have such good, powerful roots of virtue. So where are those beings now? Many of them are in Dawatingsa heaven. Many of them are in Tushita heaven, waiting. They're not going to come down at this smelly, stinky, darkening, terrible part of the eon. They have enough merits to kind of jump over it, come down when things get better. But we are here, and we do, because we've met the Buddha's teachings, we still have an opportunity to cultivate our insight, to let go of our attachments. But if you want to get contentious with the world and start thinking it shouldn't be the way it is, when it is going to be the way that it is, then that's a recipe for miserableness. So I don't want you to be miserable. I want you to be good-hearted, but I also want you to have equanimity when needed. And the thing that helps us to have equanimity, not equanimity in terms of the purified fourth jhana, that's pure equanimity, but in terms of establishing some equanimity, the thing that helps us develop equanimity is the understanding of the law of karma. So one monk had, I think he had terrible back pain, terrible knee pain. He got really fed up with it, and he went to Lumpur Cha and he says, I'm so sick of being unwell. I just want to practice. It shouldn't be like this, he said. And Ajahn Chah said, if it shouldn't be like this, it wouldn't be like this. So you can have your opinion, but it might not change the way it is. And that's kind of the tough love of the of the Arahant, reminding the monk that he can't really blame anyone. It is what it is, and we have to work with what we've got. So yes, write your letters. Yes, express your objection. Yes, have your beautiful ideals, and understand that samsara is extremely unsatisfactory, and life doesn't go towards our preferences most of the time. And meditate in the morning, meditate in the evening, chant, keep cultivating. We need to dig ourselves out of this mess. I wish you every success in the process.
Thank you so much, Prajan. Question to the Ajahn. May I know how do we know who we can consider as our Kalayamitta, wise spiritual friend? Does it mean the person will encourage us on the path and not make us feel less of a person or inferior than them? If we do feel less of a person or as though that person is superior to us, does it mean this person is not suitable to be our Kalayamitta? Even though the person may have helped us a lot, bringing us towards the path. Thank you.
It's a bit tricky, because sometimes people who are more developed than us, sometimes we can feel intimidated by that, but that isn't necessarily them doing something to make us feel inferior. So in fact, your ideal spiritual friend will have developed their beautiful qualities more than you. Now, I think the point would be, do they do things intentionally to make you feel inferior? That's a different matter. If they are more developed, have more skills, seem to be more developed, have more skills, have more merits, and you feel inferior, that's something you are doing. And, we have to have loving kindness for ourselves, we have to have patience, we have to encourage ourselves for where we are. But if a person is deliberately being patronizing, condescending, or making sharp comments to make us feel less worthy, then that is not a good spiritual friend. But if a person is just diligent in their practice and they are genuinely impressive and we feel intimidated and inferior, that's something we're doing, and we have to cultivate mudita. for their goodness, and we have to have compassion and patience for where we are and keep plodding along. So there's one sutta where Lord Buddha says that to the monks, he said, "Monks, stay with the sage who points out your faults." It's a very interesting statement. Stay with the sage who points out your faults. Now, if he's really a sage, he's going to point them out gently, kindly, encouragingly. One of Sariputta's beautiful qualities is it said that he was willing to admonish somebody up to 500 times. Amazing. Sariputta is a spiritual superhero and one of my idols. And, if only may we all meet teachers who are willing to admonish us 500 times. No, may we all lift our game after being admonished once. Sadhu. So yes, that's the thing. Is like, people aren't perfect. People have their strengths and their weaknesses. Sometimes a person can be a good person who has helped us, but they can have a competitive or a condescending edge. There is all sorts of kilesas in people's minds. Domineering is one of them. Competition is another. Contentiousness is another. So we have to see what's really present there. If a person means well, they're genuinely impressive, we feel threatened, we have to cultivate our mudita and our patience for ourselves. If a person has good qualities and bad qualities, which is most people, then we need to meditate on what is worthy of emulating and what. I remember as a junior monk, there was some of the senior monks that at Untitled Chapter that I really didn't like, and there were some that I really did like, and I used to make a note of what not to do. I would study the ones that I didn't like, and I would make a mental note. I'm not going to do that when I become an Ajahn, because this is how it makes people feel. So I made a note to not speak harshly, not to boss people around, to still be friendly and well-mannered, and to say thank you. I made notes of how to be a nice Ajahn and what to avoid. So we can learn. We learn what to emulate, what to abandon by observing others. I remember, I won't mention any names, but there was a junior monk who was going to disrobe and never wanted to go back to Wat Nanachat because he'd been disappointed by this monk and that monk and this monk. And I said to him, "You know what your problem is, Venerable? Tough love. Your problem is you're expecting each of these monks to be perfect. And can I ask you a question? In your experience at Wat Nanachat, did you know one monk who was very diligent at his meditation? Yes. Did you know one monk who knew all of the Vinaya rules and their origin stories? Yes. Did you know one monk who knew lots about the suttas? Yes. Did you know one monk that was always doing things for the community, a great example of service, selfless service? Yes. I say, that's what you need to notice, that as a community, it has shared resources. And if you commit to training there, you go and ask about suttas from the guy that knows about suttas. You go and ask about your vinaya from the guy that knows about the vinaya. You go and ask about meditation from the one that's meditating. And you observe and admire the one that's doing all the selfless service and aspire to be like him. And if you can focus on the different strong qualities of each of the monks and emulate those and train yourself, you will grow enormously. But if you expect any one of those monks to be perfect in all of these things, wrong universe, wrong point in the eon. And he's still a monk to this day. So nobody's perfect, but we learn what we can from those who have good qualities.
Question 3, dear Ajahn. I've had a few very joyful moments when contemplating Anatta, feeling as if I'm escaping the jail of the Khandas. It feels like there's an intimacy waiting, a coming home, a knowing of and being known by the other. What Bhikkhu Bodhi calls mental continuums, who are currently or recently were acting out the eyeing in their own Khandas. Is this right view or wishful thinking? Is the joy that arises from this understanding considered wholesome, even if the view might be somewhat deluded? Is this to be developed? Thank you.
I think what this person is experiencing is when there's a sense of letting go, when one contemplates the Khandas, so that's seeing form as form, feelings as feelings, etc., and contemplating these things as not a self, but as individual components, separate, then what happens is the feeling of identifying as being a self can disappear from the experience for a while. The self view isn't present because there is mindfulness and clear comprehension and wisdom, a little bit of samadhi. The self view can disappear for a few moments, and the mind experiences a sense of presence, radiance. But I think the insight is, I'll just talk from my own experience anyway. The insight is there's this wonderful feeling afterwards of recognizing the potential that human beings have with tremendous joy, because when you get a break from the kilesas from a while, from the darkness of the hindrances, when you glimpse clear, radiant presence that knows emptiness, and it's so peaceful, so wonderful, so beautiful. And there's this recognition that if that's my potential, if that's what at the heart of the matter for me, that's the same for everybody. And so that is a wonderful, joyful experience. And it makes it much easier to have metta for all beings, actually, because no matter how dark their mind is currently, at the heart of it, we know ultimately there's goodness there. But then when we have this feeling of I'll meet everybody in that space, I think what this is when because this person's having this experience for just a few moments, he says, what happens is a self-view kind of comes back and kind of reinterprets things of we will all meet there in that lovely space. And so I don't think that is a skillful perception to focus on. I think the skillful perception is all beings have that capacity to experience the joy and the clarity and the peace that you do, that you did, and that is a wonderful thing to rejoice in. But I don't think there's a meeting of everybody in that space, because people have to let go of their identification of as being a self, kind of dualistic perceptions to experience that. But probably as this person's practice deepens and their period, they're able to spend a longer period of time in that emptiness, they will understand it better. But it is a joyful and wonderful thing to experience, so I rejoice in that too.
Question for the Ajahn. When we meditate upon anatta, not self, and see the body disappear, we are still contemplating with our mind. So where is the mind? Also, when the brain dies in a coma situation, does the mind still remain active? If so, where is this mind? Is this just an invisible force that moves from one birth to another?
So similar to the previous question, sometimes when we're contemplating anatta, not self, that the not self nature of the body, sometimes there can be an insight into seeing it, the emptiness of it, and then the body can appear to disappear because the mindfulness and wisdom is aware of the empty nature. But the mind is still right where it is, right? It's just perceiving body and mind differently. The mind didn't go anywhere. I know this person's a medical doctor, and I'm assuming, being trained in that medium, there's probably two different schools of thought. I think medical doctors and a lot of biologists, scientists will tend to think that because there's a brain, there's consciousness. I think the other way around. I think because there's consciousness, there's a brain. Does the egg come first or the chicken? It's and I think a way to understand this is like with anecdotal stories is one way to consider this. So, for example, once I was in Ladakh, I'm sure I've told the story before. I was meditating, my French student was meditating, and I'd been doing a little bit of study. And there was a Muslim call to prayer. Akbala Akbar. And I was thinking to myself, Ladakh was really important during the time that the Turkish Mongol Muslims invaded northern India and burnt down the monasteries and killed the monks, because Ladakh was able to keep a certain amount of suttas, and that went along the Silk Road and became, part of Mahayana Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism. So I was just having this awareness that there was that invasion by Muslims and there had been the destruction of Buddhism, but I was personally rejoicing in the fact that Ladakh was able to preserve some teachings. But Francois, my French student behind me, was thinking, I'm going to write to the tourist authority and tell them that they should tell the Muslims to turn down the call to prayer. It shouldn't be so loud. And so he's thinking those thoughts. Now, what happened was I'd lit the candles. We were meditating in front of my shrine. And it was a perfectly fine sunny day. And this wooden shutter slammed shut. And the candles fluttered and blew out. And I got a freezing chill up my spine. And Francois behind me said, Ajahn, something is wrong. And I said, you're no kidding. I said, Francois, I've got a question. Were you just thinking critical thoughts about Muslims? I asked him. He says, I was. I was thinking that they should turn down the volume of that thing, that this is predominantly a Buddhist place and that they should play it so loud, and I was going to write to the tourist authority. And I said, yeah, well, I was just thinking about how the Muslims destroyed Buddhism in northern India, but how Ladakh was able to keep some of it. And I just had this distinct sense that there was an angry Muslim ghost in the room. And we were in Ladakh. We were in a homestay with nice Buddhists. Anyway, so we asked the guy, and he says, oh, yeah, there was a Muslim guy that was trying to buy the piece of land next to us. And the local authorities, predominantly Buddhist, wouldn't give him a title deed. So he probably died. He was stuck there. He still wanted his title deed. And he heard these Buddhists thinking critical thoughts of Islam, and he got upset. So he slammed the door and he blew out the candles, and we felt the ill will and the hostility. And so the next day we dedicated merit, did the Metta Sutta. It still didn't go away. So eventually I stood at the window and I said, look, all right, that's your land. You have it. It's yours. I agree. Sadhu. But don't come here because this is ours. That's your Muslim land and this is our Buddhist land. Now go away. And he did. What's my point? How come he could hear our thoughts? He didn't have a brain. So what is that? I'll tell you another story. When I was with Ajahn, first time I met him in the jungle with my friend Ajahn Sudanto, we were having some interesting, fun conversations. And Ajahn Sudanto says, I think I've got really good karma with food. I must have given a lot of food. He says, because, for example, suppose I think I want to eat pizza. The next day, oftentimes, pizza comes. And Ajahn would say, yeah, so you must have given a lot of food. That must be your merit. The next day, we were driving out of the jungle on an empty remote road for like a 3-hour drive to go out of that jungle area. A car stops us in the road and a guy comes out and he says, oh, I was going to offer you food tomorrow. Oh, well, here, please take this now. And he gave Ajahn pizza. We're in the middle of nowhere, coming out of the jungle. And so how did that happen? So I would assume that a deva has heard the conversation. A deva has impressed their thought on the mind of the person with faith who wants to make offerings to the monks. That person's thinking, I'm going to go and offer pizza to the monks. Comes out, And of course, I don't think the deva has a brain either, not in the way that we understand brains. So the mind sense space is functioning, and that's what has thoughts. It functions in ghosts, it functions in hell beings, it functions in devas, it functions in Brahma devas. The human beings happen to have a brain as well. But my point is, if you have a brain or not, you probably still have thoughts. So be careful what you do with them. Try to have good ones. What happens in a coma state? That is interesting. Sometimes when a person is in a coma, from what I've heard, because I know some teachers who have the ability to read situations, so it's probably situation by situation. Sometimes the consciousness has already taken its rebirth, and there's a little bit of body consciousness there which is being kept alive by machines, and the person's actually not there anymore. Other times the person can see a ghost-like image of the person wandering around the room, kind of stuck there because they still have an attachment to the body and they can't move on because the body is still there. So it probably depends how much merit the person has. It depends how ready they were to go, how willing they were to go, or how much they want to stay there and hang on and come back in to that body again. So it's different case by case. But conscious experience continues whether the brain is in a coma or not. It appears to be the case. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I hope it answered a little bit. So.
Thank you, Praj.
Also, in terms of psychic powers, monks or spiritual practitioners who develop the divine ear, this is very interesting. And it's described as consciousness embracing consciousness. So with your ear-based consciousness and your mind, you can embrace another person's body and hear their thoughts as if you're thinking them yourself. What's that? It's consciousness aware of thoughts, not the brain. And so I know one monk that was walking up a staircase through the forest, counting the steps, and then he walked past the office of a famous meditation master, and the meditation master looked at him and said, "How many?" He knew the monk had been counting the steps. How did he know that? He had sent his consciousness to embrace his consciousness and heard him counting. So yes, there are these fun stories.
Question 5, dear Ajahn. Do you have any advice on how we can make ourselves be in a retreat-like setting on daily basis when we are still living our lay life? How do we continue to keep up with mental cultivation? Thank you.
So this depends in large part upon what kind of a lay life you have. So obviously a person who has some savings and is semi-retired and the kids have left home, someone like that has more of a chance of being able to structure a morning session of meditation and chanting, an afternoon meditation of walking meditation, listening to a Dharma talk, another practice in the evening, and do their duties around those sessions. So for people who have a spacious lifestyle with not too many duties, they can make it more structured and maintain consistency. But I know the person who asked this question has her own business and is raising children. So that's different. Essentially, I don't think you can expect to have a retreat-like situation. You can just try to do some practice in the morning and some practice in the evening and bring as much mindfulness to your life as you can. But I think trying to make your life retreat-like when you have young children and you're running your own business will just be very frustrating, because it probably has to be more of a paradigm of bringing mindfulness into your activities. So that would be making sure you do the morning session, set the mind up to be as mindful as possible, take that into your daily life. if possible, if time permits, taking some time out in the afternoon to hear a Dhamma talk or to do some more practice. If it doesn't permit, then before you sleep, you do another session. So you at least begin your day and end your day with generating mindfulness. And then as your kids grow up and leave home, that's when you probably get more of a chance. You know, when they go to school as well, you're going to have more time. When they go to school, you'll have more time to yourself. So as it becomes possible to put more practice in your life, you do it. I wish you all the best with that.
Thank you, Praja. Question 6, dear Ajahn, the second noble truth states that desire for sensuality, desire for being, and desire for non-being are the root cause of suffering. I can clearly make a distinction between sensual desire, such as desire for music, and a desire to become a more patient person, which is a wholesome desire and should be cultivated. But when it comes to the desire to become, to be, when we aspire to become a more patient and wise person, how can we understand and relate to this desire to become? Thank you.
I can see why in reading the Dhammacakka Sutta, where the teachings on the Four Noble Truths are explained, why a person would then see, if that's the cause of suffering, then I have to let go of the cause of suffering. Try to let go of all of it at once. What's another thing that I think is important to notice in this sutta is at the end, when Anya Kondanya has his insight is all that is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. So we just in understanding the concept, like it is important to understand how wonderful, how fortunate we are that Lord Buddha explained to us the cause of suffering. You know, the particular thing about bhava tanha, craving for becoming, is how frustrated we feel when we don't become what we wanted to become. You wanted to be the prom queen, you wanted to be married to that guy and have the beautiful wedding, or you wanted to be the CEO. You don't think the other guy should have got it. The frustration that comes with that always wanting to be something more. The insight, all that is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. So it was when Sariputta and Moggallana had been looking for their teacher because they'd studied with great masters, had some good samadhi. And Sariputta saw Asaji walking on arms round. And he just knew there was something different about him. There's something special about him. And he approached him and he wanted to know, who's your teacher? What do you teach? And Asaji said, I can't talk to you now, I'm on my arms round. And he said, well, just give me a brief teaching, the briefest teaching. Asaji was already an arahant, and Asaji said, I'm new to this training. I don't know if I can explain it to you in full, but I can. He said, well, explain it to me in brief. And similarly, Asaji says, all conditions which are of the nature to arise are of the nature to cease. And Sariputta became a stream enterer. So it's like, it's very good that we know what the cause of suffering is. It's not the case that we can abandon it all at once. What we have to do is live within the parameters of the ethical precepts and try to keep it within wholesome parameters. So I think the desire to be a good person, the desire to cultivate your mind, all of that is wholesome. So in Buddhism, they do separate the word tanha from chanda. Chanda is aspiration. You're allowed to have a noble aspiration. In fact, you need to. Replacing unskillful desires with noble aspirations is what we do. That's how we motivate ourselves. And so we have to do that. But, it is frustrating. It's going to be times when you're not able to be as virtuous as you want to, right? It's a realm of frustration, but we have to navigate it. It seems to be the case where people really have the insight that actually truly weakens the craving, which manifests in those three ways, is by contemplating the arising and ceasing of feelings and the not self nature of the body, often in terms of seeing it as body parts and those body parts made of elements. So that's what leads to the insight. And when the mind has the insight, the craving is weakened, the darkness is uprooted. So you can keep it fairly simple. Don't try to abandon it all at once. You can't actually live within parameters. Ajahn says we have to be truly human, and then we have to be like devas. And it's okay to be a deva. You know, that's the foundation for the insight. Once we've established that foundation of being a lovely being, then we work on our insight, and then the craving will be abandoned.
Thank you, Ajahn.
You're welcome.
There are a few questions came in, but I think it's quarter past.
45 minutes, I think that's enough.
Yeah. Keep it for next session, and I think probably the next session mostly will be after our India trip.
Right. So please allow me my period of retreat, my lovely Kalayamitta. I also have to have periods where I deepen my practice, my insight. Hopefully I can come back and share more with you.
Then will you be writing some journals during the...
I'm not sure yet. You know, a pilgrimage of 55 pilgrims, 5 guides, 5 monks, I think there's going to be quite a bit of phenomenon impinging on consciousness. I'm not sure how many hours I'm going to have to compose interesting verses. But I enjoy it. Possibly when I get to my retreat time in February, a month in Bodh Gaya, possibly then I will have some more spare time.
Okay.
Yes, I'll try to.